Whatley, there is one material or line item that pretty much goes into every single estimate. And occasionally there are changes to those line items that people will continue to use those line items without knowing what actually changed. But this month we saw a change to the replacing insulation by linear foot line item that I think is a really important one that everybody drills down on to understand what happened, why did it happen, and should I be using this line item the same moving forward?
Yeah, this is the change that's going to impact the greatest number of estimates.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Price List Update Summary video series, a video series brought to you by Actionable Insights. You've got Harrison here and you've got Whatley there, and we're here to talk about the April 2022 changes to the Xactimate price list. If this is your first time joining us, there are new line items added to the Xactimate price list every month. Our goal is to look at those line items and talk about the purpose and context. Why were they added? How do I use them in my estimates when I'm scoping with Xactimate? And then we also look at the changes to existing line items, yield changes, description changes along the way. So, Whatley, we've got some exciting changes this month. There are 6 new line items added to the price list, as well as changes to 8 other existing line items, as well as they are actually removing some line items, which doesn't always happen. So we're going to have to say farewell to some of our childhood memories as a part of these changes to April 2022. Depending on when this video comes out, April 11th through the 13th, I believe those are the dates. Am I correct on that?
Yep, you got it.
Whatley and I and Actionable Insights, Cole Martin, the team will be at the RIA Conference in Reno, Nevada. In fact, Actionable Insights, Cole and I will be speaking about geospatial analysis and comparing Matterport and DocuSketch and the new Xactimate Sketch AR tool on Wednesday the 13th. Whatley, you will be there as well. What do you have on deck at the RIA Conference?
So I have the keynote with Mike Fulton, the CEO of the VeriRisk Estimating Solutions business unit. And so I'm going to be asking him some, I don't know, maybe uncomfortable questions, but our membership has been guiding, what those questions would otherwise be. And if we know anything about Mike Fulton, he's well equipped to answer those difficult questions elegantly. So Looking forward to that, and hoping it's a good session for the RIA members in attendance. Want to give people something that they can go home with and gain some perspective. And I think that's what's so often lost in this business is when we don't have perspective as adjusters or restorers, it makes it difficult to settle claims swiftly. So hopefully Mike will be able to speak to some of those things that are commonly misunderstood with an eye towards getting us in a position where we can settle these claims with minimal friction.
I love it. I've always had a great time at the RIA conferences. They're some of my first conferences when I joined this industry. So I'm very excited to go back and to have the opportunity to speak. And if you're coming, say hi. Would love to see you and talk about what Actionable is doing these days on behalf of the property insurance ecosystem. Now, without further ado, let us jump into the changes to the April 2022 Xactimate price list. I have here on my screen X1. And we have the 6 line items here. And the first line item that I want to talk about this month is a new line item, PLM PTD, for a plumbing drain line water pressure test. Now, in the last 4 to 5 months, we saw another line item pop up. You'll see right here. We had a plumbing gas line air pressure test. But it was unclear whether this air pressure test was supposed to be used for all kinds of pressure testing. And so it's awesome to see a new addition, specifically around the water pressure test. One of the things, Whatley, when you and I were preparing for this video, we jumped into the components and we look at the prices of these things. And we noticed that the water pressure test line item is significantly more expensive than the air pressure test, almost like 2.5 times more expensive. And when we come in here, if you have not jumped into the details of the component buildups of line items, I want to take a look. It's a labor component only for this water pressure test line item. Oh, this is the air pressure test line item I started with. And you'll notice the direct yield here is saying that you can do about 95% of an air pressure test, or 0.95 of an air pressure test in an hour. However, on the flip side, on a water pressure test, again, it's a labor component line item only, and it says you can do about 0.4 water pressure tests per hour, about 40% of one. So that's a big difference. Help me understand the difference between an air pressure test and a water pressure test, and why an air pressure test would take so much more time to be able to accomplish.
So air pressure tests are a lot simpler to apply. So whether it's your natural gas lines or whether it's your pressurized water supply lines, what you'll do is you'll put a meter on, say, a hose bib, and then you'll measure, okay, here's our pound PSI at this particular juncture, shut off the main, add some air to it, stabilize the system, make sure all of your faucets are off, right? There's no water running. And then if that PSI remains intact, right? It doesn't move in a material way after 10 or 15 minutes, then we know, okay, we're not like leaking anywhere from a pressurized line for nat gas or for water supply. It's an easier test to accomplish. When you're testing drain line supply, and both of these line items come up guys after a large loss fire. So if you're ever red tagged, if you're anything like Southern California, where I'm used to working as a builder, your building department's going to come out and they're going to want to audit the results of these tests prior to pulling your red tag for your utilities to get turned back on. But for a drain, it's way more complicated. So you've got to take like the OD red test plugs. You know how there's a line item for that. So that's PLM,
plug T2, plug T4, plug T6.
Yeah, plug T's. That's right. So those, you'd have to put those like in the sinks or the bathtubs, and you fill up the drain like in one, say the bathtub, to like the maximum level, and then everything else is sealed. And then you see if the drain line is actually going down, and you're going to have to shut off the lateral somewhere, right? And so you try to constrain that water between, okay, the lateral shut off. It's easy. Like if there is exposed plumbing, say below the property, and there's a crawl space, this gets a little more involved, complicated if the plumbing is run under the slab. But at any rate, what you're trying to do is see, okay, is the drain, is it leaking somewhere in the drain system? And that always takes a lot more resources than doing a pressurized. It takes more time. It takes more time to set up. It takes more time to run that test. So, because it's like less exacting. You can't do it off a PSI. Does it make sense? You're like
100%.
looking for the water to either go down or not go down. You don't want the water to go down, because if
that makes sense too.
And you shut off the lateral, that means you're leaking somewhere. That's bad.
Whoops. Thank you for the explanation. And thankfully, we have now two different line items, one designed for an air pressure test, one designed for a water pressure test. Next, we have a new door line item. We've seen a collection of new door line items come out over the last 6 months as well. This one in particular is for an interior double door with a half louvered pre-hung unit. One thing I always like to point out when we jump into these things, you have the component build up here, one labor component and a bunch of materials, but I also like checking the excludes so that when you are applying a line item, it's good to know what was included or what was not included. So it's good to point out that this pre-hung unit does not include lock set or the painting and staining of it to ensure the return to pre-loss condition. Additionally, we have 3 new line items for a flash parapet wall. Now, for those of you that have been writing roof scopes, you will have seen existing line items for flash parapet walls. In fact, there are changes to those line items, which we'll talk about in a sec. But specifically for here, we have new flash parapet wall line items for up to over 3 feet, up to 6 feet. I'm going to bring up the item information here to show off the item picture in this particular line item. You can see this would be the parapet wall. This is Whatley. We talked about probably about 3 feet. So they're using this particular photo for both the up to 3 feet flash parapet wall, as well as the 3 to 6 feet flash parapet wall. So we've seen variations of line items based on height, fencing, for example. Sometimes there's add for removal line items for drywall or add for painting at height based on specific height ranges. So if you have a flash parapet wall that's between 3 to 6 feet, then these would be your new line items, the RFG, FLP6 and alike.
So to be clear, they're not add-on line items, right, Harrison? They just operate independently.
They are completely independent. We'll show off the existing line items and the changes to those in a moment in the next section. Lastly, the 6th addition to the April 2022 price list is the Surge Protector Whole Home. This is the Surge Protector. Why do you think this was added to the price list, Whatley?
Because panels are starting to get smarter. So you're starting to get smart panels that require this surge protector utility, like SPAN, like they're making a really interesting one that's like Wi-Fi connected, et cetera. And I think it calls for this surge protector. These surge protectors, guys, those of you who have installed them, they sit below the 200 amp or 300 amp panel residential. And if there's any detection of a surge or a brownout coming from the street, then it will shut it off, right? That's what it's intended to do. And I think building departments are starting to require them more. So that's why they added the line item, I think.
That makes sense. Yeah. We don't always have all the answers here, but we do our best to clarify the intent of these line items and figure out what they're here for. All right. That summarizes the 6 new line items added to the price list. Let's now jump and compare the changes to existing line items. On the left side of my screen here, you will see a March 2022 price list in action. On the right side, as I jump to the next room here, we have the April. So March is on your left, April's on your right, and let's take a look at what changed in the existing line items. Now, as a reminder here, the Verisk puts out into their e-service center an article every month about the changes to the existing price list. This is why we started doing this video series, is to add some flavor to this text wall so that people can understand the purpose and context. And there's a collection of line items here that have had changes. Let's take a look. Whatley, there is one material or line item that pretty much goes into every single estimate. And occasionally there are changes to those line items that people will continue to use those line items without knowing what actually changed. But this month we saw a change to the replacing insulation by linear foot line item that I think is a really important one that everybody drills down on to understand what happened, why did it happen, and should I be using this line item the same moving forward?
Yeah, this is the change that's going to impact the greatest number of estimates out of everything that happened this month. This is going to hit 40% of the claims that are written on a day-to-day basis.
So when you look at the e-service center here, I'm going to bring it up, and it says insulation by linear foot, 4 foot, 4 inches. Now, please know whenever there's a star, that means wild card. That means all variations of this particular line item, of which there are a few. In fact, in December 2021, we were introduced to up to 4 feet tall and up to 6 feet tall. So this replacing insulation by linear foot has a 2 foot version, a 4 foot version, a 6 foot version. So all of these had changes to them. And I'm going to come here and I want to take a look at the material component. In March of 2022, it was a insulation for an R11 craft or foil-faced bat. And in April, this has been changed to an R13. You and I have been on the road training Xactimate over the years. We've talked about insulation and replacing insulation, and you have talked a lot about R13 in my time with you. Why do you think this change from R11 to R13 was made?
Because it's about what is most commonly used as a building material. This is driven by the municipality building departments that are guiding restorers to using R13 as a minimum. When you and I train in colder climates, you'll see R19 even in 4-inch walls as being required. But R11 is just not very common in a 4-inch wall anymore. So R13 has been the set standard in most states. So the pricing department's just keeping up with the additional insulation requirements that are prescribed by the building departments.
You can see a change in the price. Reminder, this is the San Diego price list that we use for this video series. March, $2.30, now $2.59. That's about a 29-cent increase, which really stems from the change in material. The component price was, 50 cents a square foot versus now 61 cents a square foot. And as the material line item makes up the majority of the cost, when you make big changes to the material that changes the price, that'll impact the overall price of the line.
Here, keep that up real quick.
Oh, I'm bringing it back up.
Not go to material on both.
Material component. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Edit.
Yeah, just something to note there. Do you see the 5.0 below the supporting events? That's assigning 5% waste of material for this ubiquitous building material. You're assigning 5% waste. So there is some material waste contemplated here. I just want to point that out because there's often questions you see on ninjas about is material waste included for line items like this. And yes, it's realized through supporting events. It depends on the building material, guys. How waste is contemplating. Roofing is different than carpet. Carpet's different than
Vinyl.
insulation.
Yeah.
You've got to get under the components to actually track it down.
That's a really good point. I actually want to do it again so people understand. If you're curious, if a material in a line item has waste included, you would, I'll start from scratch here. Come into the I for information under the unit price tab, click the material component you're interested in and hit edit, and you'll be able to see if this is a 0.000, that would mean there's no supporting events and no waste incorporated. But in this particular example, we have a 5.00, which means 5% waste has been included in this particular line item.
So
looks like we got about a 10% waste on the 1,000 count box of 3/8" staples.
Yeah.
So great. Yes. Not only is it fun to look through the line items, but it's also good to speak about the best practices and learning about line items and figuring out how to scope accurately.
We try.
All right. Whatley, this was a big deal last month. This was, as we said in the March video of this video series, the #1 most popular requested line item over the last 5 years that I've been with you at Actionable Insights, removing additional layers of felt. Now,
we still got 4 requests for this line item this month.
Yes, the line item came out and people are still asking for it to be created. So please share this video series with your friends so that they know what new line items came out. It's impossible for us to advocate for the adoption of line items that already exist, just generally speaking. So I love it. It's okay. Hey, this is why we continue to do this every month. And if you wonder, this is why we exist as an organization, as an educational nonprofit platform to help people understand these softwares and how to settle claims accurately, ethically, and transparently. All right. So I'm not surprised. This is one of the most popular line items, and 1 month after its release, we're already getting changes to the additional item information. Many of you may know the line item Dry Patch J, which came out in May of 2018, which now has 3 different sentences, or really 2, in the additional item information that says, cannot use this line item with. This line item is not intended. Now, I anticipated a change around that, but it's actually not. They're simply clarifying the intention of this line item. Now I'm going to pull up the additional item information for the removing additional layer of felt. You'll see what's specifically changed is that they're calling out that this line item for removing additional layers of felt should be used if there was another layer that was separately fastened. So traditionally in March, this line item said this item should be used if additional multiple layers of felt are to be removed and disposed of. Now it says this item should be used if additional multiple layers of felt that have been separately fastened are to be removed and disposed of. So the intention would be if there are 2 layers and only 1 set of cap nails securing both of those layers, once you remove those cap nails, then both layers would come off and you would not use the additional layer of felt, remove additional layer of felt line item. However, if you had multiple layers where they were each layer was separately fastened, then this line item would be used to account for the additional labor and difficulty of removing a second or tertiary set of cap nails when removing additional layers of felt. Thoughts about this change and the need to clarify this in the additional item information?
It's just discouraging in a way because you can see how hotly contested some nonsensical things are in this industry. If you had a 10 square roof, which is generally as large as your residential roof would be, and you assign this line item as a contractor, you're making less than $100 extra. So maybe it's 95 additional dollars are going to be included in your sheet. If you're a claims professional and you either decide to pay or not pay this line item, we're talking a delta of $100. Now we're clarifying a line item that is like such a small dollar amount about cap nails. I got to imagine that the pricing department's dealing with a lot of pressure carrier side for the addition of this line item. So they're trying to clarify, boy, how do we even prove, Harrison, if cap nails were used to fashion the second layer? Like now it gets into forensic photography and then analysis of said forensic photography. How many resources, folks, are we going to throw at this on both sides of the claim for something that is not even 1% of the claim value for a roof? Just seems like we need to get back to just settling claims and good faith and recognizing that there's no perfect estimate. That's something you and I don't say often in these forums, but there is no perfect estimate. Every
That's-
single estimate includes some degree of overages and omissions. There's always going to be little things that aren't otherwise absolutely required by the contractor. And I guarantee you that contractor always has to do little things for that policyholder or whatever that build requires that was unknowable later in the process that wouldn't be captured in that scope. We need to get back to like the spirit of settling claims swiftly and nobly. And this is emblematic of us losing our way.
I hear you. When we train, we often phrase it as, in general, this industry has added 20% administration burden to reduce 5% of fraud. Why do we teach the technologies and the perspective that we teach towards? It's to try to get us back to what's reasonable and customary, and not just embrace the tide of let's make things more difficult and constant over justification in order to get paid fairly for work that has to be done in the first place. But there are many industry problems that we can point out around changing demographics, turnover rate, that's indicative of why these clarifications need to be made. In general, Whatley, I would hope that as we continue to do our work here at Actionable Insights, that things get better, especially between carriers and contractors, when everybody can understand the intent and purpose of a line item when it's supposed to be used. So again, share this video series. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn, it's on Reddit. We are where you are. If we're not there, tell us and we'll find a way to get there with you. Just not TikTok. I don't want to be on TikTok yet. I still haven't given in on that one. No, I'm not.
You're going to have to hire that out.
Yeah, I'm not in on that one yet. Okay. So changes, clarifying, it's funny why, because often when there's a clarifying change, we're a fan of it. Just the fact that you can clarify the intent of the line item. So there's less friction. If two people can read the same words and interpret it the same way, great. But I understand that not all change is necessarily good change. And it seems like having to clarify these little tiny details can be frustrating.
The change is good. And I think the pricing department's move to add that line item is good. And I think their update is good. I'm not taking issue with the pricing department at all. I'm taking issue with the marketplace.
Yes.
Like, what are we doing, guys? We seem to be focused on all the wrong things at great expense, but none of it's advancing the interest of the policyholder.
Well, let's talk about the policyholder. Policyholders don't always own their own homes, and what they actually own is the contents in their home, the things that they bought and put in there. So contents has become an increasingly important part of the claim. There is a change to one of the line items that we don't necessarily endorse the use of on a regular basis. That's a good way of putting it. Con room. You may have seen it. If you do program work, you're asked to use it. And there was a change clarifying how many man hours are included in this particular line item. 1.36 previously, now 1.47. I like pointing out this line item. I know you want to talk about it. You do contents. So this one's important to you. Labor charge to move out and reset contents back into an average size room. And then it also says for situations where larger heavy items are encountered, users may need to use additional labor hours as warranted. So it's saying you get a total of 1.475 hours, which is 2 techs for 45 minutes, essentially, to move out all the contents of a room and then reset it. 45 minutes to move it all out, 45 minutes to reset it. Now, Whatley, what is your thoughts on this line item? And, with the picture given in this particular line item, is 1.47 hours enough to be able to move out and reset the contents?
Maybe. It depends. But that's not my main issue with this line item. Let's just say, for example, you can look at that living room and say, okay, we could move out the relative items within 45 minutes and then to where. So this works in the context of, like, let's say this room is the only room in that home that's affected. But if you're really removing that contents, it's probably because a flooring is in play, right? And that's continuous with the adjacent kitchen that's probably there. And perhaps the nook or eatery. If other areas are affected, where the heck do you move it to, for one thing? So that's a problem. How do you protect it when you move it? So this inherently excludes things like covering with plastic contents. There's a line item for that. Or heavy blankets that you might be deploying when you're stacking that contents and so on. It's hard for me to understand how, as a restorer, you could perform this function and not lose money almost every time when you contemplate the risk premium. So there's 2 major risks here. When you're moving contents, large pieces of contents that are heavy, you have a work comp risk that is very significant. Movers have some of the highest work comp rates in the trades because of folks back, right? And so on. There's very little is harder on you than moving. So that's one outsized risk. The other risk is what happens when you damage that content, or even more commonly, you get blamed for damaging that content. You don't have a Matterport to back you up, and you get blamed for damaging content because that was already damaged before. And I'm not saying that the policyholders engaging in moral hazard saw fraud. They probably just never noticed that their table was scratched in that way until you put it back. So you've got this outsized risk on both sides of it. You've got a timeline, which is an hour and a half to do both of those things, moving all that stuff out and then move it back. I think it's mission impossible, and it results almost every time with contractors being on the wrong side of it, which is why outside of program work, these con room line items traditionally aren't used, and folks opt for a more reasonable suite of, say, COM, LAB, augmented by some medium boxes, some heavy blankets, so on, and just bill for the labor hours that are required to, move it out and then move it back. I think that we need to, as claims professionals, give some credence to the risk that's taken by restorers when moving around content. The risk that's taken when you install an appliance. What happens when that appliance fails, leaks, the compressor doesn't work when you put the refrigerator back? Harrison, I can't tell you how many times I just put the refrigerator back. We only moved it 2 rooms away, and then the compressor didn't work because refrigerators don't like getting moved. They're sensitive that way. And then you're eating that as a contractor. So I don't know how the economics associated with this line item move a restorer forward. And I'd argue that it moves them backwards in almost every case, sometimes significantly.
Fair. I think that risk premium is something that you and I have talked about a lot, working together, especially being familiar with contents and how important contents are to a policyholder and to a claim. So it's always a good idea to think about, what does it actually cost for me to touch this person's furniture? Not just move it, but the second I touch it, I own it in some ways. So
no movers coming out for $91 to move your contents around. So that's not a thing.
Not often. All right. There are 2 line items here in the FCT floor covering tile category that have seen some slight changes to the description. You'll see here in the grout sealer line item specifically, it now says that this grout seal, FCT seal G, is specifically for the grout joints only. Historically, this just said application is for grout only. So they're very clearly saying for the grout joints only. But we cannot look at that change alone, because then the generally sealing the floor line item was also clarified to say here that it is application is for whole surface, including grout. Application of the sealer is for the entire surface, including grout. Please see seal G if sealing grout joints only. Essentially, what this means is that these 2 line items, the grout sealer and the tile stone sealer, are mutually exclusive line items for the most part. You're either going to seal the entire floor, so you're going to use seal S, or you're going to seal the grout joints only and use seal G. You would not seal the entire floor and then seal the grout joints only. That would be double dipping, overcharging. You're doing the same activity in the grout sealing twice. So it's good to see some clarifications around these line items. And I always love it personally when an additional item information points to its sister or related line item, whether it's supposed to be used together or mutually exclusive. It's just nice when a line item says, hey, use me, or if not, maybe this is the one you're looking for. All right, lastly, we saw 3 new line items around the flash parapet walls this month. These were the existing line items in the March price list. Flash parapet wall, they've had a change here where they all now say up to 3 feet. So for searchability wise and for clarity wise,
I love that they did that. That's awesome. Because sometimes they'll add the line item that would be an addition, right? An upgrade to that line item, but then they won't go back and clarify the original one. But they did that from the outset here. So that really helps when you type in parapet. You can be like, okay, am I working with a sub 3 foot or greater than 3?
Yep, 100%. Nice to see those combination of changes together, thoughtfulness on behalf of the pricing department.
Yep.
Now, that's the changes to the existing line items. We've already talked about the new line items, but for me, Whatley, it's time to say goodbye. Not very often, but occasionally, we will see the removal of line items from the price list. Almost never are there structural line items. But in previous versions of these videos, we've said goodbye to iPod shuffles and things like that. This month, they are removing another slew of line items from the contents section, primarily around action figures. Your Beyblades, your Batmans, your G.I. Joes, your Justice Leagues, your Marvels, your Pokemons, your Star Wars, your Transformers, your WWE action figures, gone. All of these line items have been removed. Then, if you want to take me even further, well, I shouldn't say take me further in my childhood, because I forgot that there's Bratz and Dora the Explorer and Cabbage Patch Kids and Furbies. Do you remember Furbies?
Dude, I remember Furbies. Dude, it's so granular. I don't understand these line items. Okay, somebody tell me down below if this is helpful to you or harmful as a claims professional. You're trying to put together an inventory. Having that level of detail for action figures, it seems like action figures would be average, economy, or premium grade action figure, and we'd call it good. Like having every brand of action figure, where does that end and begin?
I don't know.
It ends here
it ends
today.
this month. Yes,
Yeah.
It ends now. Maybe that's part of the inspiration for removing these line items, that they were too detailed. But, one thing that we'll point out here, we were also saying goodbye to the Nintendo Wii, the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation Portable. Occasionally, as the next generation of technology and consoles and devices comes out, including toys, they will sunset older versions of the line item that were designed for the Black Friday craze shopping of the 90s and 2000s for parents that needed to go get Furbies for their kids, or the Elmo doll, or whatever it is that year that people have been rushing to the stores to get. So we're saying goodbye. That doesn't mean they're gone forever. That doesn't mean
I think the Nintendo Wii is gone forever.
my parents still got a Wii that they use every now and then.
I'm not talking about the physical device that your parents are running around with. I'm talking about in the pricing department. So they killed that. I think they kill these electronics when they can't get a direct feedback on the material price anymore. I think that's what's going on.
That would actually make sense, because they can't verify what the price is anymore. So likely there's a different line item that would better represent the cost now of attempting to restore or replace that line item or that piece of equipment.
Yep.
It's hard to say goodbye to Star Wars. Star Wars was a formative series in my life. I read almost all the books that you could read as a kid growing up, but it's time to say goodbye to these wonderful toys and consoles. I don't think anybody's sad to see Furby go. I don't know if anyone our age or up that enjoyed Furbies, but they're out there.
They are. But I'll tell you what, our membership really wants is us to just wrap this thing up, because they came here for the additional item, removing a layer of felt. So
yes,
not so much the action figures.
Well done there. Well, that's going to be the end of this month's video. We have 8 new line items added to the price list. If you are going to be at the RIA Conference in Reno, Nevada, Monday, April 11th through Wednesday, April 13th, please, if you see us walking down the hall, stop us and say hi. We'd love to chat. But in the meantime, please enjoy these new line items and the changes to the existing line items, and good luck settling on those claims out there.
Keep building.